I honestly have to start this story right in the middle of the absolute worst moment of my life. The moment that completely cleaved my family in two, because if I try to build up to it, you'll never believe what I did. And I need you to understand the weight of it immediately. Picture this. I'm standing at the reception venue, the air thick with the scent of lilies and the syrupy, sweet sound of a string quartet, and my brother, Mark, is beaming, holding the hand of his brand-new wife, Sarah, a woman I knew with every fiber of my being, was a viper dressed in silk and lace, a person who had spent months methodically destroying everything I held dear, and yet, there they were, husband and wife. I had the undeniable, physical proof in my pocket, evidence that would not only halt the celebration but obliterate her entire future. And as the best man began his toast, I walked up to the microphone, pushed him aside, and I said, loud enough for every single one of the 200 guests to hear, "Sarah, before you cut the cake, you need to explain why you drained Mark's business accounts and moved to book a flight out of the country with your actual fiancé." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, a sonic absence where music and laughter had been just a second before. And in that horrifying, justified moment, I watched her face crumble from smug triumph to utter, raw terror. The question I've been asking myself every single day since, the one I need you, the audience, to help me with, is this. Was I wrong for destroying my own brother's wedding day, for exposing a monumental secret in the most public, brutal way possible, even if I was doing it to save him from a catastrophic lie? Tell me honestly if you would have done the same thing, or if I'm the monster my sister-in-law now claims I am. Now, to truly understand why I reached that point, why I was willing to sacrifice my own reputation and perhaps my relationship with my entire family, I need to take you back 6 months, back to the day my brother, Mark, first introduced us to Sarah. I'm a few years older than Mark, and I've always been the protective older brother, the one who paved the way and, frankly, the one who handled the money. I run a small, successful consulting firm, and Mark, who is an incredibly talented, but perhaps a bit naive, furniture designer, had been saving up for years to open his own workshop. I had actually helped him secure the lease and finalize the initial inventory orders. When Sarah stepped into our lives, she was this whirlwind of charm and attention. She was stunning, no doubt about it, the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly command it, not through volume, but through a certain polished, effortless grace. She said she was a gallery curator, someone who understood the finer things, and she latched onto Mark's passion instantly. She'd spend hours at his small, cramped temporary space, talking about wood grain and joinery, making him feel seen and appreciated in a way his previous girlfriends hadn't. I remember our first family dinner with her, and my initial impression was positive, if a little cautious. She was almost too perfect. She had an answer for everything, a compliment ready for everyone, and an uncanny ability to turn any criticism into a reason to compliment Mark. I noted the small things, like how she always steered the conversation to her own career successes, and how quickly she started talking about their future. A massive future involving a loft apartment and a trip to Italy, things that were far outside Mark's current financial reality, but which she presented as absolute certainties. My mother, bless her heart, was instantly smitten, seeing Sarah as the woman who would finally settle down her wandering boy. My instincts, however, were screaming a low, insistent warning. It felt like watching a highly skilled con artist at work, but my evidence was just a feeling, a gut-wrenching sense of unease that I couldn't articulate without sounding like a jealous, overbearing brother. I kept my mouth shut, but my eyes were open. The engagement happened 4 months later, which, even to my mother, seemed fast. Mark, however, was ecstatic. He was completely under her spell, truly believing he had found his soulmate, his muse, his entire future. The wedding was set for a date just 2 months out, a decision Sarah pushed for, citing an amazing last-minute deal on the perfect venue that wouldn't last. She took over all the planning, which Mark was happy about, and she insisted on a massive, opulent wedding that would, in her words, show the world how much we love each other. This is where the red flags started becoming banners. Mark was already sinking a significant portion of his savings into the workshop, his dream. Sarah's wedding demands were astronomical. She wanted a designer dress, a 5-course meal, and a destination honeymoon. When I subtly brought up the cost to Mark, trying to be gentle, he just brushed it off. He told me that Sarah had some inheritance coming through, or that she'd sold an antique piece of furniture, or that she had a secret stash of money she was using to cover the difference. He always had a vague, Sarah-proved explanation, and if I pressed, he'd get defensive, accusing me of being jealous of his happiness. That accusation, that he thought I was jealous, stung me to my core, because all I wanted was for him to be happy, but not at the cost of his life's dream. The real danger started when Mark gave Sarah access to his new workshop's bank account. This was a joint account, but it was exclusively funded by Mark's life savings and a small business loan he'd secured. He explained to me that she needed access because she was handling all the deposits from his pre-order sales and managing the budget for the custom-built equipment he needed. I advised against it strongly. I told him he should keep the business finances separate from the wedding fund, but he argued that they were a team now, that he trusted her completely, and that I needed to stop treating him like a child. That conversation was the last straw for my caution. I realized I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. Mark had stopped listening to me, blinded by the love bomb Sarah had detonated in his life. I began quietly, discreetly, digging into Sarah's past. I used my consulting firm's resources not illegally, but using professional contacts to run background checks and verify her supposed employment history. What I found wasn't a smoking gun immediately, but it was a collection of inconsistencies that piled up into a mountain of deceit. Her gallery curator job, she'd been a low-level assistant for 6 months, then fired for poor conduct, a year before meeting Mark. Her apartment, she hadn't actually been living there. The lease was in someone else's name. It was all smoke and mirrors, a life carefully constructed to appear successful and sophisticated. Then came the financial part, the truly damaging revelation. Mark was excited about his first big business purchase, a high-end, custom-milled CNC machine that cost nearly $50,000. The machine was due to arrive a week before the wedding, and Mark was thrilled, saying he could start production immediately after the honeymoon. But a week before the delivery date, I got a frantic call from the supplier. They hadn't received the final payment, and the check Sarah had written supposedly from the business account had bounced. When I called Mark, he was defensive again, saying it must be a bank error and that Sarah was already on the phone sorting it out. I didn't believe him. I logged into the online banking for the business account, something I still had access to because I was a co-signer on the initial business loan. What I saw made the blood run cold in my veins. The account was practically empty. The money for the CNC machine was gone, and not only that, but Mark's entire remaining savings were depleted. The transaction history wasn't complex. A series of large, escalating transfers to an account I didn't recognize, culminating in one massive wire transfer just a week ago. I immediately called my private investigator contact, the one I'd been using for the quiet background checks, and I escalated the urgency. I told him to trace that final wire transfer and find out who the recipient was. Time was running out, with the wedding less than a week away, and I felt like I was racing against a freight train. I couldn't face Mark with just the bank statement. Sarah would spin it, she'd cry. She'd manipulate him into thinking I was trying to sabotage his happiness. I needed undeniable, concrete proof of her motive and her other life. The next 72 hours were a blur of no sleep and constant, low-level panic. I was pretending to be excited about the wedding, sitting through family luncheons where Sarah played the role of the perfect, loving fiancé, while secretly I was checking my phone every 5 minutes for a message from my PI. The message finally came on Thursday night, just 2 days before the wedding. It was comprehensive, detailed, and utterly sickening. The account that received the wire transfer belonged to a man named David, located in a country halfway across the world. And David wasn't just a random recipient. David was Sarah's long-term fiancé, a man she had been in a relationship with for 4 years. They had been planning to emigrate together for months, and Mark's money was the final installment for a large-scale business venture they were setting up in their new country. The PI had even found the paper trail for her and David's joint residency application, and the final, most damning piece of evidence, a confirmed flight itinerary for 2 people, Sarah and David, scheduled for the Monday morning immediately following the wedding. She was using Mark for one final, gigantic payday, a massive wedding gift haul, and then she was going to vanish, leaving him with a mountain of debt, a bounced check, and a hollow, doubt dream. I felt the physical sensation of rage and absolute betrayal. This wasn't just gold digging. This was criminal, malicious, and devastating. I sat there in my darkened office, staring at the evidence on my screen, and the weight of the decision I had to make crashed down on me. I could show Mark now, but he was so deep in denial, so invested in the wedding, that he might actually accuse me of fabricating the evidence, of trying to ruin his life. He might still go through with the wedding, convinced Sarah would explain it away, and then she'd leave him anyway on Monday. Or I could wait. I could wait until the moment she thought she had won, the moment she was legally bound to him, when all the guests were present, and I could expose her in front of everyone, making the lie so public and so humiliating that she would have no choice but to face the consequences, and Mark would be forced to see the truth. That's what brought me to the question I need your help with, the moral dilemma that was eating me alive as I put on my suit for the rehearsal dinner. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was holding a nuclear device in my hands. I had the power to stop a crime and save my brother's entire financial future, but I would have to do it in a way that guaranteed maximum collateral damage. I had to decide whether the immediate, horrifying shock of a ruined wedding was better than the slow, agonizing destruction of a man who would only find out he'd been conned after he'd already legally married his tormentor, and she was already on a plane. Before I tell you what happened next, what I actually did when I stepped onto that stage, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have quietly shown the evidence to your brother, risking his denial and risking Sarah running away before he could act? Or would you have done what I was contemplating, the nuclear option, and exposed her publicly to make the truth undeniable? I genuinely need to know if my decision makes me a hero or a villain. I chose the public route. I made the conscious decision to wait until the wedding day, knowing the drama would be astronomical, but also knowing the truth would be impossible to deny. The morning of the wedding was surreal. I went through the motions, acting as the supportive best man, helping Mark with his tie, listening to him talk about how lucky he was. Every word he spoke felt like a stab wound, and I had to physically hold back the truth, keep the paper, clipped evidence tucked deep inside my inner jacket pocket. The ceremony itself was a blur of false vows and saccharine smiles. I watched Sarah, radiant and breathtaking in a gown that cost more than my car, and I felt no satisfaction, only a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just saving Mark, I was avenging him. The reception was where I had planned my move. The toasts are always the most attentive part of the evening, the moment when everyone is focused and quiet. I knew that the best man, Mark's old college friend, was scheduled to go first. I let him speak for a minute, and as he was winding down, I made my move. I walked up to the head table, the biggest, baddest decision of my life echoing in my chest. I didn't ask, I just took the microphone. My brother looked confused. Sarah looked annoyed, a slight, barely perceptible wrinkle of impatience crossing her perfect features. I didn't stutter, I didn't yell. I spoke in a voice that was low, clear, and perfectly amplified. Sarah, before you cut the cake, you need to explain why you drained Mark's business accounts and moved to book a flight out of the country with your actual fiancé, David, on Monday morning. The explosion that followed was not one of sound, but of shattered glass and panicked motion. Sarah didn't try to lie, she couldn't. Her terror was too immediate, too real. She screamed, not a denial, but an incoherent sound of panic. Mark's face went from blissful joy to a mask of pure, white, hot incomprehension. I didn't stop there. I pulled the papers out of my pocket, the bank statements showing the wire transfer, the email thread from the PI, and the flight itinerary, and I held them up for the first few tables to see. I addressed the room, not just my brother. This woman, I said, pointing at her as she tried to bolt from her seat, is a criminal. She has stolen over $200,000 from Mark's future business and was planning to abandon him in 3 days to start a new life with the man she is actually engaged to. I have the evidence right here, and I've already sent copies to the police and Mark's lawyer. That was a slight exaggeration. The lawyer part was true, but I needed the police threat to keep her from fleeing immediately. Chaos erupted. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably. Mark, bless his heart, didn't move for what felt like an eternity, and then he let out this low, animalistic roar of pain and fury. He didn't look at me, he looked at Sarah. He grabbed her arm as she finally found her legs and was running toward the exit. He didn't hurt her, but he held her tight, demanding to see the papers, demanding to know if it was true. My father, a stern but quiet man, came to my side, a silent nod of approval in his eyes, which was all the validation I needed. When Mark finally wrestled the papers from my hand, he read the itinerary first. The destination, the 2 names, the date. He let go of Sarah's arm as if it were a poisonous snake, and she used the opportunity to run, barreling through the back door of the venue and into the waiting panic of her own family. The aftermath was catastrophic and utterly necessary. The police were called, not by me, but by the venue manager who was worried about the scale of the disturbance. Sarah's side of the family, realizing the depth of the public humiliation, left in a rush, dragging the mother of the bride with them. Mark was inconsolable. He didn't speak to me or anyone for the rest of the night. He just sat in a side room with my father and his best friend, staring blankly, his tuxedo looking like a costume. The divorce proceedings started the next morning, but thankfully, since they hadn't legally consummated the marriage and the grounds were clearly fraud and theft, Mark's lawyer was confident they could annul the marriage and potentially recover some of the funds through civil action against Sarah and her accomplice, David, especially since I had stopped her before she could flee the country. With Mark's money, The criminal charges against Sarah were filed the following week, fueled by the undeniable paper trail I had secured. Sarah, surprisingly, didn't make it to that Monday flight. She was apprehended at her apartment on Sunday night, packing her remaining luggage. She tried to frame me, of course, telling the police I was an obsessed, jealous brother who had hacked her accounts. But the evidence was overwhelming. The money was recovered, mostly, traced and frozen in an offshore account that David had set up. Mark's dream, the furniture workshop, was saved. But the emotional cost to us, was immense. For months afterward, my relationship with Mark was strained, a constant, brittle silence stretching between us. He was grateful, he eventually admitted, but he was also profoundly embarrassed and mourning a future that never was. He couldn't reconcile the hero who saved him with the brother who humiliated him in front of everyone he knew. It took therapy, both for him and for us as brothers, to finally heal that wound. Sarah faced justice, serving time for fraud, and the last I heard, David had abandoned her. I have no regrets about the decision I made. I look back on that day, the day I blew up my brother's wedding, and I know I did the right thing for his life, his future, and his sanity. He would have been lost otherwise. The money was one thing, but the shame of realizing you married a ghost, a professional deceiver, would have destroyed his soul. I took the blow of being the bad guy, the harbinger of bad news, so he could be free. It was a terrible day, a disaster, but it was also a cleansing fire that burned away the lie. I'm proud of my resolve, but I still carry the burden of the execution. In the end, what I learned from this whole horrifying experience is that sometimes saving the person you love requires you to become, momentarily, the villain in their eyes, and you have to be okay with that. The moral of this story isn't about revenge. It's about the difference between comfort and truth. I could have offered comfort and silence, letting the lie live on, or I could offer the brutal truth and endure the pain it caused. I chose truth, and while the pain was immediate and absolute, the long-term freedom it brought was worth every single hostile stare I received that day. I've put the shame behind me, but I hope you never have to make a choice like that. Like this video if you were on my side, if you think I made the right, impossible decision to save my brother. Subscribe for more stories like this, especially if you love a good tale of justice being served in the most dramatic way possible. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or was a spectacle the only way to break the spell? I'll see you all in the next story.